So here's our top 10 ways of really taking your bike to the next level so it's as cool as a pro bike. Sort out your cables. Cables should be just long enough to give you free movement of the handlebars, but no longer. So I've got loads of long cables up front, so I'm just going to reduce the length of those so it looks nice and neat. I'm also going to put some protective tape anywhere on the bike where they might rub, and just get some clear patches, and make sure I've got cable ends so that I don't get any frayed cables. I do have quite a few cables, so I've got a dropper post and the shapeshifter on my bike, so it's never going to look super neat up front, but that's as best as I can get it. I would go through the whole bike and check for things that might be making noise. Make sure the bearings are good on your front wheel, your headset's tight, but the main causes are probably chain slap or your cables whacking on the inside of your frame. So there's a couple of ways of sorting that out. The chain gets bounced around a lot on rough trails, so just check on this side of your bike, look down the inside of this chain stays or the seat stays, and if it's been whacking on them, you'll be able to see chips and marks out of those, so just make sure you've got them covered with something. I've got this chain stay protector, and you can see where it's got little marks and the chain hitting it, but that's really going to stop all the noise. So just double check your frame and cover those parts where the chain is hitting it. So there's a couple of little tricks to stop internal cabling from rattling inside your frame. One is to cover your inner gear cable with a bit of this tubing. That's just going to stop that metal from tinging against the inside of the frame. Or if you've got one long internal outer piece of cable for the gears, a little trick is to get a small zip tie like this, wrap it around the cable and try and thread that into the frame. What's going to happen is once that's wrapped around the cable, that sort of tail end of the zip tie will actually push against the frame and can stop your cables moving around inside the bike. So now you've got your bike running nice and smooth and not make any rattles, it's time to have a look at the suspension. And this does depend how often and the sort of conditions you ride in, but it's often recommended to check the bushings and change the oil every 30 hours or just an annual service. So just try and keep a track of how much you're using your bike and when you last had the suspension serviced. Have a good look at the stanchion on your fork and the shaft on the shock and just look for any signs of oil leaking out of those units, or if there's any marks where it's starting to rub away the surface of those, then it's definitely a sign that you need that suspension looking at and it's time for a service. To get the real pro look, get that bike shining. So give the bike a good clean, and once it's clean and dry, use some spray that has silicone in it to really give it that sheen. Just be careful not to get it on your brakes or on your grips or on your saddle. It's really slippy stuff. There's nothing like a shiny chain of cassette to really make that bike look well cared for. So first give your bike a good wash down and then spray on this foaming degreaser. Really get in there with a brush and try and work all those bits of muck that are stuck to your chain off there. You might need to do this a couple of times depending on how black and oily and dirty that chain is, but it should come up really nice and clean after a while. Try and tidy up the cockpit. I'm using these SRAM matchmakers to mount my gear shifter onto the brake lever, so I've not got loads of clamps everywhere. Same with my reverb and my rear brake lever. You can get these for Shimano brakes and gears as well. Use titanium bolts. Yes, they're not essential, and yes, they don't save a lot of weight, but they do look really cool and all the pros use them where every gram counts. Make sure your stem is straight. I know this is a really simple one, but I can't believe how many of my friends' bikes have their stems off on the skew. So the way I do this is by loosening the stem bolts, and I look down the back of the handlebars and line that up on the top of the fork crown, just to make sure both sides are equal and my stem is perfectly straight. Trim your steerer tube down so you don't have a big bit sticking out the top of your stem. If it's a new bike, I would build your bike first and then ride it for a little while so you know you've got your bars at about the right height, and then trim it down so you haven't got a big bit up there. It's unsightly, but it's also a bit of a hazard. I always leave my steerer tube long enough just so I can run a small spacer like this, so maybe if I go and ride somewhere really steep, I can put that spacer underneath the stem just to raise it a touch, but I don't have any more than one small spacer. Line up your logos. Of course it's not essential, but who are we kidding? It is essential. For the pro look, you've got to have your tyre logos next to your valves. It's just rules. So there you go, there's 10 simple tips to take your bike to the next level so it looks just like a pro bike. If you want to see more videos from GMBN, you can click up here for our 30-minute bike wash, or click down here for how to index your gears. Or click on me and my pro bike to subscribe to GMBN. It's free.